When I walked into the courtroom, my late husband's will was in my hand. I could feel the paper trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the pulse of a heart that had been betrayed too many times. My son, my only child, sat at the plaintiff's table beside his wife, the woman who had once kissed my cheek and called me Mom. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. Maybe because they knew the moment I opened my mouth, their perfect little scheme would begin to unravel. The air inside that courtroom was thick like a storm about to break. Lawyers whispered, cameras clicked, and I could feel the judge's eyes on me as if measuring the weight of a mother's heartbreak. For months they had painted me as senile, confused, incapable of handling my own affairs. My son had filed the petition himself, claiming that after his father's death, I was too fragile to manage the estate. What he really meant was that he wanted everything: the house, the land, even the pension his father left me. They said it was for my own good. But what kind of good begins with betrayal? As I stood there, I remembered the last time my husband William Hayes held my hand. His skin was cold, but his grip still carried the strength of the man I had loved for 40 years. "Promise me," he whispered, "you'll protect what we built together. Don't let anyone twist it." I had nodded through tears, never imagining that the person I would have to protect it from would be our own son. When the clerk asked me to take the stand, I walked slowly, each step deliberate. Every footfall echoed like a heartbeat in the silent courtroom. Mrs. Hayes, the judge, said kindly, "You understand you're here today regarding the estate of the late Mr. William Hayes." I nodded. My voice was calm. "Yes, Your Honor, and I have something to say before anyone reads that document." At the defense table, my daughter-in-law leaned toward her attorney, whispering something with that fake smile she always wore, the kind that never reached her eyes. She looked perfect as always, every strand of hair in place pearls around her neck, the picture of innocent elegance. But I knew the truth. I had seen the way she looked at my husband's study after the funeral, her eyes scanning the drawers, her hands brushing the edges of his files. She thought I didn't notice. I did. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, Mrs. Hayes's emotional state has been unstable since her husband's passing. We request that the proceedings continue with the official copy of the will already submitted by the family." The judge turned to me. "Do you have something different to present, Mrs. Hayes?" I placed my trembling hand on the small leather folder I had brought and said softly, "I do." The room shifted. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I looked directly at my son for the first time. He wouldn't meet my gaze. "This," I said, holding up the folded paper, "is the real will, the one my husband wrote with his own hand." My daughter-in-law gasped. "That's impossible. We already have the notarized version." "Yes," I said, "the notarized version your lawyer conveniently prepared 3 days after the funeral." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Hayes, are you saying the document on record is a forgery?" "I'm saying," I replied, my voice low but steady, "that my husband trusted the wrong people. And now, I'm here to make sure his words are heard the way he intended." For months I had stayed silent, playing the part they assigned me, the grieving, fragile widow. I listened to their lies, their rehearsed sympathy, their constant manipulation. They said they were worried about me living alone. They wanted me to downsize to move into a smaller apartment closer to care. But I knew the truth. They wanted the house my husband built with his hands, brick by brick, the same house where I raised my son, where I buried my husband's ashes beneath the rosebush he planted for me on our first anniversary. The humiliation had started quietly. A missing key, a locked drawer, a checkbook that accidentally disappeared. Each small betrayal was like a cut that bled dignity. My son had always been gentle, thoughtful, but after his marriage to Clara, something in him hardened. She whispered poison in his ear, and he drank it like wine. I remember the night I overheard them. I was walking past their bedroom door, and her voice sliced through the dark like glass. "Once we get the house, we can sell it and finally move to Florida. Your mother will understand. She's too sentimental to fight." My son didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was his consent. In the courtroom, that silence was still between us, a living thing. I could feel it breathing. Their lawyer spoke again, louder now, trying to regain control. Your Honor, the plaintiff insists that Mrs. Hayes is confused. The will she holds cannot be verified. I met his gaze. Oh, it can. Every letter, every word, every comma of this will was written by William Hayes. His handwriting, his seal, his faith in me. The judge nodded slowly, then let it be read. As I handed the document to the bailiff, my eyes stayed fixed on my son. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who brought me wildflowers from the backyard, who kissed my cheek goodnight and said he wanted to be just like his father. But that boy was gone. Money had taken his place. The bailiff walked the paper to the judge, who unfolded it carefully. The sound of the paper cracking open felt like thunder. Everyone leaned forward. The judge began to read aloud. I, William Hayes, being of sound mind and clear intention, leave the house at 1424 Maple Street to my beloved wife, Eleanor Hayes, who has built this life beside me with faith, love, and sacrifice. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. My son dropped his gaze. The judge kept reading, his voice calm and final. And I trust her to decide what becomes of our home, for she is the heart of it. There was a long, hollow silence after the last word. Then I spoke not to the judge, not to the lawyers, but to the two people who had brought me here. I didn't come today to fight for money, I said quietly. I came to fight for truth, for my husband's words, for the home that was built with love, not greed. The judge looked at me with something like respect. Mrs. Hayes, we'll verify the authenticity immediately, but I must say it appears your husband was a man who valued integrity. He was, I said, until the end. I turned back to my son, and I intend to honor that even if it means standing against my own blood. The lawyer tried to protest, but the words fell flat. The power in the room had shifted. The meek widow they thought they could silence had just set the stage for a reckoning. As the judge called for recess, I sat down slowly, the will still warm from my touch. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time in months, I felt my husband's presence, not in grief, but in strength, whispering from somewhere beyond. You did right, Eleanor. The court clerk announced that the handwriting expert would be summoned. My son rubbed his forehead, already realizing what was coming. My daughter-in-law stared at me with eyes full of hatred and fear. And I smiled, because the truth once spoken has a voice that never dies. If you were in my place, if your own child betrayed your trust for money, would you stay silent, or would you fight for the love that built your life? Comment 1, if you'd fight for what's right. Like this story, if you believe truth always finds its way home. The morning after the funeral, the house felt like a museum of ghosts. The coffee cups from the wake still sat in the sink. The scent of lilies from the funeral parlor clung to the curtains, and my husband's slippers were still by the bed, slightly turned, as if he might walk in at any moment. But he wouldn't. What I didn't know then was that grief wasn't the only shadow moving into my home that day. At first it was small things. My son Daniel came by more often than usual, always with Clara, his wife. She wore black, but her sadness looked rehearsed. She patted my shoulder and said all the right words. You're not alone, Mom. We'll take care of you. William would want you to rest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe them. But behind her soft voice was a tension, a rush, as if she was waiting for something to begin. 3 days after the burial, I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to make sense of the bills that had piled up. Daniel walked in without knocking, his tie loosened, a man in a hurry. Mom, he said, you shouldn't worry about this stuff anymore. Claire and I can handle everything. You need peace. He used the same tone he used when he talked to his secretary. Smooth, dismissive, polite. I pushed my glasses up and looked at him. Your father and I managed this house for 40 years. I think I can pay the electric bill. He smiled tightly. It's not just the bills. There's the insurance, the property tax, the estate documents. It's complicated. Clara has been talking to a friend who works in law. Maybe it's time to get things in order. In order, I repeated. The words felt like cold water down my spine. The house is in order, Daniel. Your father left everything to be divided fairly. Clara appeared behind him, then her perfume arriving before her words. Eleanor, dear, she said sweetly, we're only thinking of your comfort. This place is so big for one person. You could sell it, get a cozy apartment near downtown. We'd handle everything, less stress for you." I stared at her. This house was built by my husband's hands. Every brick, every nail, he poured his life into these walls. You think I'll trade it for an apartment near a coffee shop? She laughed soft and airy. Of course not, it's just practical. Practical. That word rang in my ears long after they left. The following week, I started noticing details that didn't fit. My husband's file cabinet in his study, once locked, was open. The drawers had been rearranged. A faint smell of her perfume lingered on the handle. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe Daniel had needed a document for the insurance claim. But then one afternoon, as I was cleaning the desk, I found a sheet of paper folded under a stack of unpaid bills. It was a photocopy of a will. The signature looked like my husband's, but something about it was wrong. Too neat, too deliberate. William had been a left-handed man, his handwriting slanted with a gentle curve, always a little uneven. This signature was perfect symmetrical. It was a forgery, or at least that's what my gut told me. My heart pounded as I read the lines. The document stated that all property, including the family home, would be transferred to Daniel Hayes and his wife Clara Hayes for the purpose of continued family maintenance and care of Eleanor Hayes. My name was there, but not as an owner, only as a dependent. The words blurred. I could barely breathe. I dropped the paper and sat down hard on the chair. I thought of the night my husband had written the real will in his study, candlelight flickering on his face. He called me in and said, "Ellie, I don't trust banks and lawyers to understand love. I'll write it myself, clear and honest." I had watched him write each word in his familiar, looping hand. He signed it, sealed it in a brown envelope, and locked it in the cabinet. Now that will was gone. That evening, I called Daniel. My hands shook as I held the phone. "Did you go through your father's papers?" There was a pause. "I might have." "Why?" "Because his study has been disturbed, and because I found a will, one I don't recognize." He sighed. "Mom, please don't get upset. Clara and I had the lawyer draft a clean version. The old one wasn't legal. It wasn't notarized. Dad made mistakes." "Your father didn't make mistakes," I said sharply. "He was careful. He was a man of detail." "He was sick," Daniel said, his tone suddenly colder. "You forget how confused he was at the end." I could barely believe what I was hearing. Confused, he knew exactly what he was doing. "Mom," he interrupted, "we're just trying to make sure things are fair. You can't handle all of this alone. You need someone to take care of you. I've been taking care of myself since before you were born." He sighed again, the way people sigh when they think they're dealing with a child. "Let's not fight about this. We'll talk later." He hung up before I could reply. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like a warning. On the mantel sat our wedding photo, the glass slightly cracked. I ran my fingers over it. "What are they doing, William?" I whispered. "Why is our son turning against me?" The next day I went to see Mr. Graham, my husband's old lawyer. His office was the same as it had always been, smelling of paper and pipe smoke, walls lined with books. He was an old man now, his hair completely white. When he saw me, his expression softened. "Eleanor." "I'm so sorry about William. He was a good man." "Thank you," I said, sitting down. "Mr. Graham, I need to ask you something. Did my husband ever bring you a will?" He hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "He did. About 2 months before he passed, he said he wanted to make sure his intentions were clear." My heart leapt. "Then you have it." His eyes flickered uneasy. "No. A week later, your son came by, said William had changed his mind. He took the document. I thought it was at your home." "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." Mr. Graham sighed. "Eleanor, I shouldn't tell you this, but someone offered me money to stay out of the probate process. Cash in an envelope. I refused, but it unsettled me." "Who?" He hesitated. "Your daughter-in-law came to see me the day after your husband's funeral. For a moment I couldn't speak. The air left my lungs. She came here. She said it was for your peace of mind. She wanted to make sure I wasn't holding any documents that could have confused the process." Those were her words. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. "Mr. Graham, can you prove it?" He looked ashamed. "I didn't record it, but I remember every word." The room felt like it was spinning. I thanked him and left, walking out into the crisp winter air. Snow had begun to fall, soft flakes landing on my coat. I stood there on the sidewalk looking up at the sky, feeling the betrayal sink deep into my bones. My son had taken his father's last words and turned them into a weapon. My daughter-in-law had turned grief into opportunity, and I, the woman who had given them everything, was being erased one forged signature at a time. But I wasn't done, not yet. That night, I sat at my husband's old desk and whispered, "You told me to protect what we built. I'm going to do just that." And somewhere deep inside, I felt the first spark of defiance flicker back to life. The next morning began with silence, the kind that feels too careful, too deliberate. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. I woke before dawn, unable to shake the echo of Mr. Graham's confession. Clara had gone to him. She'd actually tried to erase my husband's last words. I sat on the edge of the bed, the chill of the wooden floor biting into my bare feet, staring at the faded wallpaper we'd chosen together 40 years ago. It was patterned with small yellow roses, and now I wondered if I'd ever see those walls again. At 8 o'clock sharp, a knock came at the door. Through the frosted glass, I saw Clara's silhouette, sharp, impatient, perfectly composed as always. I considered not answering, but curiosity, or maybe fury, pushed me forward. I opened the door. "Clara," I said quietly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" She smiled that rehearsed smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Daniel's been worried. You've been, acting a bit erratic lately." "Erratic," I repeated, keeping my tone steady. "You mean asking questions you don't want answered?" Her eyes flickered just for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You're grieving, and grief can make people paranoid. We all want what's best for you. What's best for me?" I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. "Then come in. Let's talk about what's best." She hesitated, clearly not expecting the invitation, but she walked in her heels, clicking against the hardwood floor like a metronome of deceit. She glanced around, assessing the house again as if calculating its worth. I noticed her eyes linger on the portrait of William above the fireplace. "Such a lovely picture," she said softly. "He looks so peaceful." "He was," I said, "until people started disturbing his legacy." Her smile faltered, but she sat down gracefully on the couch. "Look, Eleanor, I know you're upset. Daniel told me about your discovery, that old will you found. But honestly, it doesn't hold up legally. The new version was done properly with witnesses, a notary, everything." I crossed my arms. "You mean the one you had drafted 3 days after his funeral?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I continued, my voice calm but cutting. "Mr. Graham told me everything. About your visit. About the cash you offered him." The mask cracked. Her expression hardened, her voice turning cold. "That old man shouldn't open his mouth. He's confused. He's retired for a reason." "Funny," I said, "that's exactly what you and Daniel say about me." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Finally, she stood smoothing the front of her blouse. "You're making a mistake, Eleanor. All of this could go away if you just signed the property transfer. Daniel would take care of you. You'd never have to worry about bills, maintenance, or being alone again." "Alone," I repeated. "I'd rather be alone than surrounded by thieves." Her eyes narrowed. "You always did think too highly of yourself. William spoiled you. Daniel's just trying to be practical." I took a slow step toward her, close enough to see the thin line of sweat forming at her hairline. "Tell me, Clara, how much did Daniel's gambling debts cost you before you came after this house?" Her face went still, the color draining. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." My voice dropped to a whisper. "I spoke to Mr. Harris at the bank. He said Daniel withdrew nearly $20,000 in cash the month before your wedding, the same month you started advising him about his future inheritance." She stiffened, clutching her purse. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when you turned my son into a liar." Her voice snapped like a whip. "You don't know anything. You lived your life clinging to that man and this house, pretending you're some saint. You think people owe you for your sacrifices, newsflash. Eleanor, your husband's gone, and this place will be ours whether you like it or not." For a second, the fury in her voice was so raw it startled even her. She turned on her heel and left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. When the silence returned, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a strange calm. the kind you feel right before a storm hits. Because now I knew for certain. I wasn't paranoid, I wasn't losing my mind, I was being hunted quietly and systematically by the people I had loved most. Later that afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Allen dropped by with a basket of bread, her kind eyes full of concern. I saw Clara leaving earlier. She looked furious. "Is everything all right?" I forced a smile. "Everything's fine. She just doesn't like it when old women have opinions." Mrs. Allen hesitated. "Eleanor, I don't want to worry you, but I saw Daniel here last night. Late. Around 11, he parked down the street. I thought maybe he forgot his key." I frowned. I didn't see him. "Well, I'm sure it was nothing." But he was carrying a box. Big one, looked heavy. A cold shiver crept up my spine. "Thank you, Margaret," I said quietly. "You've been a good friend." That night, I walked through the house with a flashlight checking every room. Nothing seemed out of place, but I could feel it. The air felt disturbed, as if someone had been there. The drawers in William's study were perfectly aligned, too neat, too intentional. My husband had been many things, but tidy wasn't one of them. Then I noticed something else, the small safe in the corner of the study. It had been there for years, half hidden behind an old bookshelf. William had always said, "That one's just for keepsakes." Photos, old letters, nothing important. But the rug in front of it was slightly crooked, and when I knelt to straighten it, I saw a faint scuff mark near the keyhole. Someone had tried to open it. The key had been missing since the funeral. I'd searched every drawer, every jacket pocket, every hiding spot William used. But as I knelt there, my eyes caught something glinting under the edge of the desk. A small brass key. I picked it up with trembling hands and fit it into the lock. It turned smoothly. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing a handful of envelopes, a silver watch, and a bundle of yellowed letters tied with ribbon. On top was a small notebook in William's handwriting. The first page stopped my breath. "If you're reading this, Ellie, it means I didn't have time to tell you everything." I sank to the floor and read by the beam of my flashlight. His words flowed like a whisper from the grave. "I've noticed Clara's interest in our finances. I've warned Daniel, but I fear she has too much influence. I've hidden one copy of the will written by my hand somewhere safe. You'll know where to look when the time comes." I closed the notebook, tears spilling silently. He had known. My William had seen it coming. The greed, the manipulation, the betrayal. He had trusted me to find the truth. Suddenly, a sound shattered the silence, a faint creak from the back hallway. I froze, listening. It came again, slow, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot across the old floorboards. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath. For a full minute, there was nothing but the pounding of my heart. Then the back door clicked shut. By the time I reached it, whoever had been there was gone. But outside, under the porch light, footprints trailed through the thin layer of dust on the wooden steps. Small, narrow prints. A woman's. I locked every door, every window, and sat awake until dawn with the safe open beside me. On the desk lay William's notebook, the brass key, and the first piece of proof that I wasn't crazy. Someone was trying to erase my life, but they had just made their first mistake. The following week, my world began to shrink. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, insidious, like a slow leak in the walls of your own home. People I'd known for years started looking at me differently. Their smiles became hesitant, their eyes searching, cautious. The whispers followed me everywhere I went, to the grocery store, to church, even at the post office. "Poor thing," I heard one woman murmur to another near the bakery aisle. "Losing her husband must have been too much. Clara says she's not well anymore." Not well. Those two words followed me like a curse. It was clear now Clara was spreading her poison with precision. The first step to stealing someone's legacy is making everyone else doubt their sanity. It worked like magic. Overnight, I became the fragile widow, the confused old lady, the poor soul who shouldn't be left alone. One afternoon, Pastor Lewis dropped by unannounced. He'd known William and me for decades, married us in that very church. He sat at the kitchen table, his face heavy with concern. "Eleanor," he began gently, "I just wanted to check on you. People have been saying you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should rest a bit. Let Daniel handle things for a while." I stared at him. "People or Clara?" He hesitated. "She did mention you've been worried about certain things. Worried about being robbed." "Yes," I said sharply. worried about losing everything my husband and I built because of lies." He sighed. "Eleanor, grief makes us see enemies where there aren't any." I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "And what if the enemies are real?" He didn't answer. Instead, he prayed for me before leaving, as if my greatest threat was the darkness in my own mind. That night, I sat alone in the living room staring at the empty chair where William used to read. The notebook from the safe sat on the table beside me. I flipped through it again and again, trying to decipher his clues. He had hidden the handwritten will somewhere safe, but where I searched the house for days, the attic, the basement, every drawer and shelf. Nothing. Meanwhile, Daniel's calls became colder, shorter. "Mom, Clara and I are talking to a lawyer," he said one afternoon. "It's time to make things official. You can't keep dragging this out. The property has to go through probate." "The property belongs to me," I said. "To me and to your father's memory." "Mom," he sighed, "you're not thinking clearly. Dad wanted us to have stability. Clara and I are drowning in bills. Don't you understand? We're family. Family doesn't forge signatures." He paused, his voice hardening. "You need help. I can't keep watching you spiral like this." "Spiral," I repeated, almost laughing. "I'm the only one who's standing still while the rest of you spin around greed." He hung up without another word. By the end of that week, I received a letter from his attorney, a formal notice, informing me of an assessment of competency to determine whether I was capable of managing my own finances. My hands shook as I read the words. Clara's fingerprints were all over it. They wanted to declare me unfit, to strip me of legal power so they could claim everything in my name. I remember walking out onto the porch that night. The moon was thin and cold and the air smelled of rain. The rosebush William had planted was heavy with blooms, each one trembling in the wind. "They think they can bury me," I whispered to the petals, "but they've forgotten I'm made of roots." The next morning, I found the back door unlocked again. This time I knew I hadn't left it that way. My heart pounded as I checked the study. The safe was still open, but the notebook was gone. My husband's words, his warning, had vanished. I felt something inside me collapse. For the first time since his death, I cried. Not quietly, not politely, but with the kind of grief that tears through years of self-control. It was an ugly, shaking cry that left me gasping for air. I had nothing left to fight with. No proof, no allies. Just rumors about my madness and an empty house echoing with betrayal. By noon, Mrs. Allen came knocking again. "Eleanor, dear," she said gently, "I heard you were shouting last night. Are you all right?" I forced a smile through swollen eyes. "Just the wind," I said. But she didn't leave. "I saw someone near your house again around midnight. A car I didn't recognize. Black sedan. It drove off when I turned my porch light on." My stomach dropped. "Did you see who it was?" "No." "But Eleanor, I think you should tell the police." "The police?" I almost laughed. "And say what? That my son and his wife are sneaking around my property. They'd call me crazy just like everyone else." Mrs. Allen looked at me with pity. "Then at least tell someone you trust." I nodded, though in truth I trusted no one. That evening, I gathered every remaining document I could find: bank statements, tax receipts, old letters William had written to his brother. Maybe there was something, anything, that could help me prove the truth. As I sorted through the papers, a small folded card fell out of one of the envelopes. It was a note written in my husband's hand. "The safest place is where love began." I read it over and over, my heart pounding. Where love began. Our love had begun in this very house in the small sunroom at the back. It was the first room William built with his own hands before the house was even finished. That's where he'd proposed to me, kneeling on the dusty wooden floor, holding a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. It was our beginning. I rushed there, moving aside the old rocking chair, the faded cushions, the potted plants. The wooden floor creaked under my feet. I knelt, pressing my hands against the boards. One of them felt loose. With a screwdriver, I pried it up. Beneath it, wrapped in wax paper, was a flat brown envelope sealed with tape. My breath caught. I tore the paper open. Inside was the will written in my husband's unmistakable hand, his pen strokes curved like they always did, the ink slightly faded, but legible. I, William Hayes, declare this to be my final will. Tears blurred my vision as I read the rest. It was all there, his wishes, his love, his trust in me, and at the bottom, his signature uneven and strong. I sank onto the floor, clutching the document to my chest. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew they'd try to take it all." For a brief moment, I felt peace, but that peace shattered the moment the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was cold, businesslike. "Mom, I just wanted to let you know we're coming by tomorrow. Clara wants to talk things through. Maybe we can end this before it gets ugly." "Ugly?" I asked quietly. "You've already dragged me through hell." "Stop being dramatic," he snapped. "We're trying to help you." "Help me," I laughed bitterly. "You broke into my home. You stole your father's words. And you dare to call that help." There was silence. Then his voice dropped low and dangerous. "Mom, be careful what you accuse people of. You're not well, and if this continues, we'll have no choice but to intervene legally. For your safety." He hung up. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my pulse hammering in my chest. "For your safety." The phrase twisted in my stomach like a blade. They weren't just trying to steal the house anymore. They wanted to silence me. That night, I locked the real will in the lining of my old suitcase between 2 layers of fabric. I kept the envelope with me wherever I went, even to bed. I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing William's voice in my head, the last thing he'd ever said to me. "Promise me you'll protect what we built." But how do you protect yourself when your enemies wear your last name? By morning, the gossip had reached a fever pitch. A woman from church came by with a casserole and a forced smile. "We're all praying for you, Eleanor," she said, looking around the house as if expecting to see the chaos of a madwoman. "You should consider moving in with your son. It's not good for you to be alone." I took the dish, forced a smile, and closed the door. The casserole went straight into the trash. That afternoon, I found my mailbox stuffed with letters, pamphlets for retirement homes, brochures for senior living centers, all with notes written in Clara's elegant hand, "Thinking of you." I laughed, then a bitter, broken laugh that echoed through the empty hallway. They were trying to push me out of my own life. But as the sun set, I stood in the doorway of the sunroom, the hidden floorboard still slightly lifted, and I made a promise to the man whose love had built these walls. "You trusted me once. Now it's my turn to fight." They thought I was weak. They thought grief had dulled my mind, but they were about to learn that nothing sharpens a woman's resolve like betrayal. The next morning felt like the calm before a storm that everyone but me had already been warned about. The air outside was unusually still heavy, with a quiet tension that seemed to press against the windows. I woke to the sound of my name being called, not tenderly, not softly, but sharply, as though it were a summons. Mom Daniel's voice carried from the front door, followed by the crisp click of Clara's heels. I hesitated at the top of the stairs. They had let themselves in. Again. When I stepped into the living room, they were already there, standing like prosecutors waiting for a confession. Clara wore a pale beige suit and a diamond pin that caught the morning light like a blade. Daniel looked tired, but determined his tie too tight, his expression locked in that cold politeness I'd come to dread. "What are you doing here?" I asked my voice, even though my pulse was already pounding. Daniel forced a smile. "We just wanted to talk, Mom, that's all." Talk? I looked from him to Clara. "Last time we talked, you tried to steal my house." Clara stepped forward, her tone sickly sweet. "Eleanor, please, that's not fair. We're here because we love you. We're worried." "Worried," I repeated. "About what? That I might live long enough to stop you." Daniel flinched, but Clara's face didn't move. She had rehearsed for this moment. "You've been imagining things," she continued. "Neighbors say you're yelling at night. You're paranoid, locking yourself in the house, accusing everyone of stealing. That's not normal, Eleanor. We need to help you before it gets worse." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. A stranger entered, a man in a navy suit carrying a briefcase. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," he said politely. "I'm Dr. Linton. The family asked me to come by for a quick wellness evaluation. Just a routine visit." My stomach dropped. "You brought a doctor here." Daniel stepped forward, his voice soft, careful. "It's nothing official. We just want to make sure you're okay, Mom. That's all." I turned to him slowly. "You think I'm insane." He swallowed hard, but didn't deny it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, it almost stole the air from my lungs. My own son had brought a stranger into my house to decide whether I was still worthy of my own mind. Dr. Linton smiled reassuringly, pulling out a clipboard. Would you mind if we talk privately? Mrs. Hayes? No, I said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of them. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. All right then. I'll just ask you a few questions. How have you been sleeping lately? As well as anyone being robbed by their own family, I said flatly. He scribbled something down. Any trouble with memory? Forgetting things. I remember every lie that's been told in this room, I replied. Does that count? Clara sighed dramatically, glancing at Daniel. See, she's agitated again. I could feel my hands shaking, but I refused to look away. If you're going to diagnose me, doctors start with the symptoms of betrayal. Dr. Linton cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, no one is here to hurt you. Then why do I feel like I'm on trial? Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, please, we're trying to help. Help, I snapped. By declaring me incompetent, by forging your father's will, by sneaking into my house at night. The doctor froze mid-scribble. Forging a will. Clara's smile vanished. She's confused, she said quickly. Delusional even. But I didn't back down. I walked to the side table and pulled out the suitcase I'd kept near me for days. You want proof, I said. Here it is. I unzipped the lining, pulled out the brown envelope, and held it up. Your father's real will. Daniel's eyes widened. Mom put that down. No, I said, not this time. Clara stepped forward, her voice low. Eleanor, you don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm defending the truth. Before I could react, Clara lunged forward and snatched the envelope from my hand. I gasped, trying to grab it back, but she was faster. She tore it open and pulled out the papers. This she laughed bitterly. This is a piece of garbage. It's not notarized. It's meaningless. I felt the blood rush to my head. Don't you dare! But before I could finish, she crumpled one of the pages in her hand. Stop, I shouted. I reached for her, but Daniel stepped between us, holding me back. Mom, calm down. Calm down, I screamed. She's destroying your father's will. Dr. Linton raised his voice. That's enough. Everyone needs to calm down. But I couldn't stop. You think you can erase him just like that? You think ink and lies can replace love and decades of work? Daniel's grip tightened. Mom, please, you're scaring me. Good, I hissed. Maybe fear will wake you up. Then something in him snapped. Enough, he roared. He snatched the papers from Clara's hands and threw them on the floor. I'm done with this madness. If you keep acting like this, I'll have to file for guardianship. You'll lose everything. I stood frozen, watching the pages scatter across the floor like fallen leaves. The air felt heavy and electric. The room seemed to shrink around me. For a brief moment, I saw William's face in my mind, calm, kind, steady. And then I heard myself whisper, do it. Take it all, but when the truth comes out, remember this moment. Remember the day you stopped being my son. He looked at me, his jaw trembling. For the first time, guilt flickered across his face. But Clara's hand found his arm, anchoring him back to her side. Let's go, she said coldly. She's hopeless. Dr. Linton gathered his things awkwardly. I'll make my report, he murmured. When the door closed, the silence was unbearable. The papers still lay on the floor, wrinkled and torn. I knelt collecting them with shaking hands. A corner of the signature had ripped clean off. I pressed it together carefully, trying to fit the torn edge back like a broken promise. My tears fell on the ink smudging William's name. That night, I didn't bother locking the doors. What was the point? The danger wasn't outside, it lived in my blood. I sat in the dark, the torn will spread out before me, whispering into the emptiness. You told me to protect it, William. But how do you protect something from your own child? I don't remember falling asleep, only waking to the sound of my phone ringing the next morning. It was Mr. Graham. His voice was strained. Eleanor, you need to come to my office. Now. My heart lurched. What happened? There's been a motion filed, he said. Your son's attorney is petitioning for emergency conservatorship. They're claiming you're mentally unfit and a danger to yourself. For a moment, I couldn't speak. A danger to myself. Yes. They submitted testimony from a physician, Dr. Linton. He says you exhibited delusional behavior during an in-home evaluation. I sat down hard, the world tilting around me. When is the hearing? 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks. That's all I had before a court could take my life out of my own hands. After hanging up, I wandered through the house in a daze. Every photograph, every piece of furniture suddenly felt like evidence in a case against me. The walls themselves seemed to whisper crazy, unfit, unstable. At dusk, There was another knock at the door. I almost didn't answer, but when I did, a young man stood there holding a clipboard. Mrs. Hayes. Yes. I'm from the Department of Elder Services. I've been asked to conduct a wellness inspection. May I come in? I stared at him. You people move fast. He shifted uncomfortably. It's just procedure, ma'am. We've received several reports of concerning behavior. From who I demanded? I can't say. Of course he couldn't. I let him in. He walked through the house, taking notes, snapping photos. When he finished, he looked at me with polite detachment. You live alone. I survive alone, I corrected. He didn't respond. He just thanked me and left, leaving the scent of bureaucracy and pity in his wake. When the door closed, I felt something inside me snap. Enough hiding, enough pleading for understanding. I was done waiting for justice to find me. I would go find it myself. That night, I gathered the damaged, will the notebook, copy every scrap of paper I could salvage, and place them into a sealed envelope. Then I called Mr. Graham. I'm not waiting for court, I told him. I want to fight back now. He hesitated. Eleanor, if you make a move too early, they'll twist it against you. They'll say it proves you're paranoid. Then let them, I said. But I'm not dying quietly in my own house while they strip me of everything. He was silent for a moment, then his voice softened. All right, come tomorrow morning. We'll build a case. As I hung up, thunder rolled outside, rattling the windows. I walked to the sunroom to the floorboard that had once hidden the will and pressed my palm against it. The wood was warm from the day's heat. You tried to warn me, didn't you, William? I whispered. You saw it all before it happened, but you didn't know how far they'd go. The next morning, I awoke before dawn. I dressed in William's old flannel shirt, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and pipe smoke. I packed the envelope into my purse, locking it twice. As I stepped outside, I saw movement at the edge of the yard, a figure standing near the rose bush. When I called out, it darted away, disappearing behind the trees. The early light caught something glinting in the grass. I walked over and bent down. It was a small silver bracelet, Clara's. I looked toward the trees, my pulse quickening. So it was her. She'd been here maybe looking for the will again, maybe making sure I hadn't left any traces behind. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket and looked up at the gray morning sky. The rain was coming, and with it the reckoning. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt alive. Because when someone tries to bury you under their lies, there's only one thing left to do, rise from the dirt and make them choke on the truth. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake watching the clock tick toward dawn, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound left in a house that used to echo with laughter. I thought of every moment that had led here, the gentle way William had placed his hand on mine, when he signed that will, the promise I had made to protect what we built, and the son who now wanted to erase us both. But grief had burned away into something sharper. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I was angry, and anger, when tempered with clarity, becomes purpose. At 7:00 a.m., I locked the door behind me and drove to Mr. Graham's office. The roads were wet from the night storm, reflecting the pale sunrise like cracked glass. When I arrived, he was already waiting, a stack of files spread across his desk. You look like a woman on a mission, he said quietly. I am, I replied. We're done being polite. He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. I've been thinking about your case all night. We can't just tell the court your son and daughter-in-law are lying. We have to prove it. We'll need a handwriting expert to authenticate your husband's will character witnesses, to confirm his state of mind before he died, and evidence of tampering or manipulation. I reached into my purse and placed Clara's silver bracelet on his desk. She's been sneaking onto my property. I found this by the rose bush last night. Mr. Graham picked it up, studying it. That's good, he said. We can show she had opportunity and motive, but we need more than circumstantial evidence. I handed him the torn pages of the will, carefully flattened and sealed in plastic. This is the copy she tried to destroy. It still bears William's signature. And I have a recording. He looked up sharply. A recording. I nodded. The night they came to talk, I left my phone on the mantel with the voice memo app running. It caught everything, the threats, the argument, Daniel's words about taking legal control. He smiled for the first time. Eleanor Hayes, you've got more fight in you than any client I've seen in 20 years. William didn't raise me to surrender, I said simply. We spent the next 3 hours building a strategy. Mr. Graham called in a forensic expert named Dr. Collins to analyze the handwriting. When she arrived, a middle-aged woman with steady hands and calm eyes. She took one look at the will and said, "If this is forged, it's a poor imitation. The pen pressure, the slant, even the spacing. These are consistent with decades of writing habits. Whoever wrote this wrote it from memory, not imitation." My heart leapt. "So it's real?" She nodded. "Undoubtedly. I'll have the official report ready in 48 hours. It felt like oxygen rushing back into my lungs. For the first time, the truth had something tangible, proof that couldn't be twisted or denied. After she left, Mr. Graham leaned back in his chair. "Now we play their game, but smarter. I'll file a motion to halt the conservatorship pending investigation of fraud. That should buy us time. You'll need to stay sharp, Eleanor. They'll push harder once they realize you're not breaking." "I've already broken," I said softly. "What's left now is rebuilding." That afternoon, I returned home. The sky was clearing, sunlight pouring through the windows like forgiveness. I walked into William's study, the place where this war began, and sat at his desk. The old clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm grounding me. For months, this room had felt like a tomb. Now it felt like an armory. I replayed the recording from my phone, listening to every cruel word Clara and Daniel had said. At one point, Daniel's voice trembled with frustration. "If she won't sign, we'll find another way. Clara, make the doctor write what we need." The doctor. Dr. Linton. So he wasn't just complicit, he was coached. I paused the recording and stared at the wall, thinking, if they were willing to bribe or pressure a physician, what else had they falsified? There had to be more. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out the bank statements I'd saved over the years. The accounts William and I shared showed consistent patterns: bills, groceries, mortgage, small donations to the church. But after his death, one transfer stood out: $10,000 withdrawn from our joint account on the very day of his funeral. And the signature on the withdrawal slip, Daniel's. It was as though every lie they'd told was unraveling thread by thread, leading straight back to the truth. I called Mr. Graham again. "I have new evidence," I said. "Financial fraud." "Bring it tomorrow. We'll add it to the file," he replied. That night, the phone rang again, but this time I let it. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going silent. Then it started again. On the 3rd round, I answered. Mom Daniel's voice was strained, anxious. "I know you're angry, but please stop making this worse. You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You stole from me, from your father, from everything he believed in." There was a long pause. Then his voice cracked. "You think I wanted this. You think I wanted to hurt you. I'm drowning, Mom. I lost my job 6 months ago. Our house is in foreclosure. Clara's credit cards are maxed out. I didn't know what else to do." The confession hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You could have come to me," I said quietly. "You could have told me the truth. But instead, you let her turn you into a thief." "She said the will wasn't legal," he said desperately, "that you'd lose everything if we didn't fix it." "Fix it," I repeated. "You mean forge it." Silence again, then a low whisper. "Please, Mom, don't take this to court. I'll make it right." "It's too late for that," I said. "The law will decide now." He exhaled shakily. "Then I guess you've chosen your side." "I didn't choose Daniel," I said. "You forced me." When the call ended, I sat there staring at the phone. I wanted to believe there was still something good left in him, but goodness without courage means nothing. The next day, Mr. Graham filed the motion. Within hours, the court issued a temporary halt on the conservatorship hearing. We had bought time and time I knew was all I needed to win. I spent those days preparing, gathering every letter William had ever written me, every document bearing his handwriting. Dr. Collins returned with her final report, authentic beyond reasonable doubt. When I read those words, I felt something shift deep inside me. The fear that had kept me small evaporated. For the first time since William's death, I felt like myself again, the teacher, the mother, the woman who had built a life from nothing and refused to let anyone dismantle it. That evening, as I sat in the sunroom watching the sky turn orange, I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't frantic or aggressive this time, just one firm, deliberate knock. I opened it to find Mrs. Allen holding a small USB drive. "I think this belongs to you," she said. I frowned. What is it? She smiled faintly. My grandson installed a new security camera for me last month. It faces your driveway. I saw something strange a few nights ago and thought you should see it. I plugged it into my laptop. The footage was grainy, but clear enough, a black sedan pulling into my driveway at midnight. Clara stepping out, looking around and walking straight toward the rosebush. She knelt there for several minutes before leaving. The proof was complete handwriting, financial records, recordings, and now video. The puzzle pieces had finally formed a picture, and in that picture stood a woman who had underestimated the strength of an old widow's love. As I stared at the frozen image of Clara on the screen, I felt no rage, only clarity. I understood her now, her greed, her desperation, and her hollow ambition. She believed that power came from possession, but real power, I realized, came from truth. And I had it. When I met with Mr. Graham the next morning, he reviewed the new evidence and nodded. This is enough. Once we file, they'll have nowhere left to hide. Good, I said. Let them run out of places to hide. It's time they faced what they've done. He smiled. You sound like a woman who's ready for war. I looked out the window at the city skyline, the sun breaking through the clouds. No, I said, not war, justice. The difference is that justice doesn't destroy, it restores. That night, before going to bed, I walked to William's grave. The grass was still damp, the headstone smooth beneath my fingertips. I placed my hand over his name. I kept my promise, I whispered. They'll hear your words again, every single one of them. As the wind rustled through the trees, I could almost hear his voice, in the breeze, warm and proud. When I turned to leave, I felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because I knew how it would end. They had awakened something in me they could never silence again. The day before the hearing, the sky turned gray again, as if even the heavens wanted to watch what was coming. I woke before dawn and stood at the window looking out over the garden. The rosebush was swaying under the wind petals scattering across the wet grass. William's roses. He used to prune them every Saturday morning, humming the same off-key tune, telling me they bloomed better when spoken to gently. But now they seemed to bloom out of defiance, wild and red, fed by everything I had buried in silence. I spent the morning at Mr. Graham's office, finalizing the documents, the authenticated will, the recording, the footage, and the financial report. Every piece was in order, neatly labeled, ready for court. As I prepared to leave, he touched my arm. Eleanor, tomorrow's going to be ugly. Once people like them are cornered, they don't go quietly. I'm not expecting quiet, I said. I'm expecting truth. By late afternoon, I was home again, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The house was so still I could hear the clock ticking from the hall. I almost didn't hear the knock on the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there alone, his face, pale eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" For a moment, I said nothing. Part of me wanted to shut the door and let tomorrow speak for itself. But another part, the mother part, hesitated. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, like a man approaching a stranger's house, not his childhood home. He looked around the living room, his gaze landing on the family photos still hanging on the wall. Him as a boy on his father's shoulders, his high school graduation, the three of us smiling in front of this very house. His throat worked as if swallowing a stone. "You haven't changed a thing," he murmured. "I was waiting," I said quietly. "Maybe for you to remember what this house meant before it became a prize." He turned to me, his eyes tired but pleading. "It's not what you think, Mom. I didn't plan any of this. Clara, she said the will wasn't valid, that if we didn't handle things properly, the state could take everything. I believed her. I thought I was protecting you." I held his gaze. Protecting me by taking everything I own, by declaring me unfit to live in the house your father built. He rubbed his hands over his face. "I didn't know it would go this far." "Yes, you did," I said. "You knew when you watched her tear that will. You knew when you signed those withdrawal slips in my name. You knew when you brought that doctor here to call me crazy." His shoulders sagged. I didn't know how to stop it. "You stop it," I said sharply, by telling the truth. By standing up to her. By remembering who you were before she taught you how to lie. He looked down silent. For a long time, we just stood there, the air between us thick with everything we hadn't said in years. Finally, he whispered, "You don't understand what it's like. After Dad died, everything fell apart. I was drowning in bills and debt. Clara promised she'd fix it. She said she could make things better. I wanted to believe her. "You wanted the easy way out," I said, "and she gave you one wrapped in deceit." He winced. "She's not all bad." "She's poison," I said softly. "She just mixed herself with sugar first so you'd drink her willingly." His eyes flicked up to mine, angry now. "You always hated her." "I didn't hate her," I said. "I feared what she'd turn you into, and I was right." He took a shaky breath. "I came here to ask you not to go through with this. Please, don't go to court. Don't ruin us." "Ruin you?" I laughed bitterly. "You ruined yourself. Tomorrow isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about truth. If you had told me the truth, there wouldn't be a court to walk into." He stepped closer, desperation in his voice. "Mom, if you do this, I could lose everything, my job, my reputation." "And what did you think I lost?" I cut in. "You took my peace, my home, my dignity. You let that woman make me a stranger in my own life. Do you know what it's like to have the world whisper that you're crazy while your own child stands by and says nothing?" He didn't answer. His eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move toward him. I couldn't. Not yet. "Do you know what broke me most?" I said quietly. "It wasn't the forged will. It wasn't being called delusional. It was standing in my kitchen hearing you say that your father was confused when he wrote his last words. You called the man who raised you, who worked himself sick to give you a life confused, just to make room for her lies." He covered his face with his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Sorry doesn't fix the truth," I said, "but it's a start." He dropped his hands and looked at me. "If I testify against her, will you forgive me?" I studied him for a long moment. His face was lined with guilt, his eyes older than they should have been. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy who used to run through this house barefoot, holding out wildflowers and laughing when his father chased him through the hall. That boy was still there somewhere, buried under years of fear and bad choices. "If you tell the truth tomorrow," I said, "then maybe we can find our way back. But if you lie again even once, then you're no longer my son." He nodded slowly, tears spilling freely now. "I'll tell the truth." I didn't embrace him. I didn't trust myself to. But when he turned to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Mom," he said softly, "I miss Dad. Every day." I think about what he'd say if he saw all this. I swallowed hard. He'd say that a man's worth isn't in what he inherits, but in what he protects. He nodded once, then walked away into the gathering dusk. When the door closed, I felt the weight of years lift just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Maybe tomorrow he would stand beside me. Maybe he wouldn't. But whatever happened, the truth was already awake, and the truth never sleeps again once it opens its eyes. That night, I packed the original, will the evidence, and the recording into a single leather folder. I placed it on the kitchen table where the morning light would hit it first. Then I brewed a pot of chamomile tea and sat by the window watching the last light fade from the garden. Tomorrow I would walk into that courtroom not as a broken widow begging to be heard, but as the woman who had kept her promise. Tomorrow William's voice would speak again through me, and the world would finally hear what love looks like when it refuses to die. The courthouse smelled of old paper rain and nerves. People moved in hushed murmurs, shuffling documents, adjusting ties, avoiding eye contact, as if truth itself was contagious. When I stepped through the double doors, the air seemed to shift. Every head turned. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, a few judgmental. But I walked straight down the aisle, each step steady, the click of my shoes echoing like a metronome of resolve. Mr. Graham was waiting at our table, his briefcase already open, his face calm but alert. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, more than ever. Across the room, Clara sat beside her lawyer, flawless as ever, hair-pinned pearls gleaming, face carved in composure. She didn't look at me. Daniel sat one chair away from her, his hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if guilt itself had hollowed him out. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise." The judge entered, a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes. "Be seated," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This is the case of Hayes versus Hayes regarding the conservatorship and estate of the late William Hayes." My heart pounded once, then steadied. The opposing lawyer, a slick man named Reed, stood first. "Your Honor, we maintain that Mrs. Eleanor Hayes is no longer capable of managing her affairs. We have testimony from a licensed physician stating she suffers from delusional paranoia and that her behavior poses potential harm to herself and others. My clients, Daniel and Clara Hayes, are simply acting in her best interest. A few heads nodded in the courtroom. He was good, polished, practiced. Then Mr. Graham rose, straightening his tie. Your Honor, what my learned colleague calls delusion, I call deception. We intend to prove that this so-called concern was nothing more than a cover for financial fraud, forgery, and manipulation. We will present evidence of a forged will, falsified medical reports, and multiple attempts to defraud my client of her home and estate. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel once. Proceed. Mr. Graham called me to the stand first. I swore the oath, my right hand trembling only slightly, then sat facing the sea of faces. Mrs. Hayes, he began gently, can you tell the court in your own words what happened after your husband's death? I took a breath. My husband, William Hayes, wrote a will by hand. He left this house, our home, to me. After his death, my son and daughter-in-law produced another will, typed and notarized, claiming everything belonged to them. They told me it was for my safety, but it wasn't safety they wanted, it was control. Mr. Graham nodded. And what did you find, Mrs. Hayes? I found the real will, I said, my voice firm, written in my husband's handwriting, hidden beneath the floorboards of our sunroom. I found his notes warning me that someone might try to alter his words. And I found proof that my daughter-in-law bribed his lawyer and falsified medical reports to make me seem incompetent. Clara's lawyer objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Mr. Graham smiled slightly. We'll get to the proof shortly. The judge gestured for him to continue. Graham picked up a folder and handed it to the clerk. Exhibit A, the handwritten will of William Hayes, authenticated by forensic handwriting expert Dr. Elizabeth Collins. The judge examined the pages, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. Dr. Collins, please approach. Dr. Collins, composed and confident, took the stand. I analyzed the handwriting on both wills, she said. The handwritten document is unquestionably authentic. The so-called notarized will shows clear signs of digital forgery, a scanned signature layered over a printed form. Clara's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Are you saying my client forged a legal document? I'm saying whoever submitted that document did, Dr. Collins replied evenly. Mr. Graham continued. Exhibit B, an audio recording taken inside Mrs. Hayes' home. He pressed play. The courtroom filled with the sound of voices, my son's voice trembling, Clara's voice sharp. Mom, calm down, Daniel shouted. You'll lose everything if you don't sign. Then Clara's hissed words followed. If she won't cooperate, we'll make sure the doctor writes what we need. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward. That is your voice, Mrs. Hayes. It is, I said quietly. And theirs. Daniel's face went white. Clara glared at him, her nails digging into his arm. Mr. Graham raised one final exhibit. Exhibit C, security footage from a neighbor's camera. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy image of Clara stepping out of her car at midnight, walking to the rose bush, kneeling. The silver bracelet glinted under the porch light. This footage, Mr. Graham said, was recorded 3 nights before the supposed wellness check. My client later found this bracelet in the same spot. Clara's composure cracked. This is absurd, she snapped. I was checking on her, she's unstable. Mr. Graham's tone sharpened. Then why sneak around at midnight? Why take papers from her property? Why forge a will? I didn't forge anything. Then why did your husband withdraw $10,000 from Mrs. Hayes' account the day of the funeral? Daniel's head dropped into his hands. The judge's gavel struck once. Order in the court. Mr. Graham turned to me. Mrs. Hayes, what do you want the court to understand today? I looked directly at the judge. That love built my home, Your Honor. Not greed. My husband trusted me to protect what we created together. I don't want revenge. I just want his words to mean something again. The courtroom was silent. Even Clara stopped breathing. The judge took a long pause, reading through the documents again, flipping pages slowly. Finally, he spoke. The evidence is overwhelming. The handwritten will is authentic. The secondary will is invalid. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I am recommending the matter of potential fraud be referred to the district attorney's office for review. Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel slumped his shoulders, shaking quietly. When the gavel came down, the sound echoed like thunder. It was over. Reporters were already whispering, cameras, flashing, voices rising, but I didn't hear any of it. I stood gathering my papers with hands that no longer trembled. As I turned toward the exit, Clara caught my arm. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You'll regret this, old woman." I looked at her calmly. "No, Clara, you will." Her lawyer pulled her back before she could answer. Outside, the air was bright and clean, the rain having washed the streets clear. Mr. Graham joined me on the courthouse steps. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "The truth did." I looked up at the sky where sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Somewhere I imagined William smiling, his voice warm and steady. "You kept your promise, Ellie." And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. By the time I stepped out of the courthouse, the air had changed. The sky was still gray, but the heaviness was gone, replaced by that rare, charged quiet that comes right after lightning when the world knows something irreversible has happened. Reporters waited by the steps, their microphones glinting like little daggers. "Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel to win against your own family?" one shouted. "Do you plan to press charges?" another asked. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The papers in my hands, the authentic will, the judgment, the proof spoke louder than I ever could. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The mother who fought back. Elderly woman exposes family fraud. My phone buzzed nonstop, neighbors, old students, even strangers from across the state calling to say they admired my courage. For the first time in months, my name wasn't being whispered in pity. It was being spoken in respect. But the attention came with fire, and fire spreads fast. The first witness to come forward was Dr. Linton, the physician Clara had bribed. He walked into the police station 2 days later and confessed that he had been pressured into filing a false report about my mental state. He said Clara had offered him $3,000 to speed up the paperwork. His statement hit the evening news, and with it, the story turned from a private scandal into a public outrage. People were furious, not just for me, but for what my case represented. Talk shows debated elder abuse, social media flooded with the hashtag #JusticeForEleanor. By Friday, a local news crew came to interview me. The journalist, a kind young woman named Ava, asked gently, "Mrs. Hayes, when you found out your own son was involved, did you ever think about giving up?" I looked straight into the camera. "Yes," I said. There were days I wanted to disappear. But then I remembered something my husband used to tell his students. Silence is the accomplice of every lie. I decided I wasn't going to be silent anymore. That night, the clip went viral. My word "silence" is the accomplice of every lie spread across comment sections, like a spark on dry grass. And then the unexpected happened. Daniel showed up at my door. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. The arrogance was gone. The sharpness in his voice had been replaced by something fragile shame. "Mom," he said quietly, "they've charged Clara. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. She's denying everything, blaming me for it all." He swallowed hard. "They might arrest me too." I studied him for a long moment. "Did you tell them the truth?" "Yes." He met my eyes, all of it. I gave them the emails, the bank records. I told them she made me do it, but I also told them I let her. "That's my sin, Mom. I let her." The words landed like a stone, breaking the surface of still water, painful but cleansing. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to do his homework as a boy. The silence between us was no longer hostile. It was the fragile kind that follows confession. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear me say it." I nodded slowly. "It's not forgiveness you need, Daniel. It's change. Real change." He nodded. "I've already resigned from my job. I'm working with the prosecutor now. They say if I testify, I might avoid prison." "Then testify," I said simply. "Not for your freedom, for the truth." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve you." I placed my hand over his. "Maybe not, but you're still my son. And as long as there's breath in me, I'll pray you learn what your father tried to teach you dignity isn't given. It's earned." For the first time in years, Daniel wept openly. 2 days later, he kept his word. He testified against Clara, revealing every detail: the forged will, the bribes, the secret meetings, the midnight visits to my home. When the recordings were played in court, even Clara's lawyer refused to defend her further. She was sentenced to 3 years for fraud and obstruction. The trial made headlines again. Reporters called it the Hayes case, how a widow brought down a family conspiracy. But for me, the real victory didn't happen in court. It happened quietly a week later when I went to Sunday service for the first time in months. When I walked into the church, the congregation turned. For a second, I braced myself for the old whispers. But then Mrs. Allen stood up clapping, and then the others followed. Within seconds, the whole room was on its feet. The applause wasn't loud or wild. It was solemn, full of something deeper than celebration. It was acknowledgement. After the service, Pastor Lewis approached me. His eyes glistened with regret. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I owe you an apology. I doubted you when I should have listened." I smiled gently. "You're not the only one who doubted me, but I don't hold it against anyone. Sometimes faith isn't about believing in God, it's about believing in yourself when no one else does." He nodded, humbled. Over the next weeks, letters began arriving at my door from women across the country. Some were widows like me. Some were mothers estranged from their children. All of them wrote the same thing: "You gave us courage." One letter stood out. It came from a woman in Texas who wrote, "I've been afraid to stand up to my own daughter for years. After hearing your story, I finally did. Thank you for reminding me that truth doesn't retire even when we do." I sat by the window that night reading those letters under the soft lamplight and realized something profound. This wasn't just my fight anymore. My small war inside one family had become a mirror for others, a reminder that injustice doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who share our blood. The next morning, a reporter asked if I'd like to speak at a community forum on elder rights. I accepted, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted to make sure that what happened to me would never happen to another woman sitting alone in her kitchen, doubting her own sanity because someone she loved convinced her she was broken. Fire spreads, lies spread faster, but so does courage. And mine had finally caught flame. Justice doesn't arrive with applause. It comes quietly like dawn, breaking through a long night, slow, pale, inevitable. In the weeks after the trial, the house was finally silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the suffocating one filled with suspicion and fear, but the kind that lets you breathe, the kind that lets you begin again. Clara was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Fraud, forgery, obstruction, and coercion. Each word read aloud by the judge was like another chain closing around her lies. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Watching her destroy herself was never the point. The morning she was taken away, I sat in the sunroom where William's will had been hidden and drank my coffee. I looked out over the garden as the first light touched the rosebush. The blooms had deepened to a darker red that year, almost crimson. They looked like defiance itself. Daniel visited a week later. He wasn't the man who had walked into that courtroom beside her. His arrogance was gone. He lost weight. His voice was quieter, and there was something humble in the way he carried himself. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table that had witnessed every stage of this war, betrayal, confrontation, forgiveness. "They offered me a deal," he said. "Testimony for leniency. I won't go to prison. But I've agreed to community service and financial restitution. I sold the house Clara bought, the one she said was ours. The money will cover what she stole from you." I nodded slowly. That's a start. He looked at me, searching my face. "You don't hate me." I sighed. "I hated what you became, but hate is heavy, and I've carried enough weight for one lifetime." Tears filled his eyes. "I don't deserve you." "No," I said gently, "but maybe one day you'll deserve yourself." He bowed his head, and for the first time in years, I saw my son again, the boy who used to sit at that very table eating peanut butter sandwiches and talking about becoming an engineer like his father. That boy was still in there somewhere trying to climb out of the rubble. He stayed for an hour that day, helping me repair the porch steps William had built decades ago. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The rhythm of hammer and nails said everything words couldn't. Later that week, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. The forged will had led to new legislation being proposed at the state level, mandatory verification of handwritten wills and stricter penalties for family fraud. They were calling it the Hayes provision. My name tied forever to something that might protect others. It made me proud, but also sad. Justice is always bought with pain. Mrs. Allen, my neighbor, visited with her homemade bread. "You know, Eleanor," she said, smiling softly, "people talk about you like you're some kind of hero." I laughed quietly. "Heroes don't cry themselves to sleep, Margaret." She shook her head. "Heroes do whatever it takes to stand up when everyone else sits down. That's what you did." Word of what happened spread beyond our small town. I started receiving invitations to speak at legal forums, elder rights conferences, women's groups. At first, I declined them all. But one letter changed my mind. It came from a retired teacher named Nora. She wrote, "I watched your story on television. My son took my savings last year and told everyone I was senile when I asked for it back. I was ashamed to fight him, but after hearing you say that, silence is the accomplice of every lie, I found the courage to speak up. Thank you." That was the day I decided that my story didn't end in the courtroom. A month later, I stood on a stage at the local community center. Rows of faces looked up at me, some young, some old, most marked with the quiet pain of people who had been silenced too long. I told them what William used to say, "Dignity isn't something others can give you. It's what you protect, even when you have nothing left." When I finished, there wasn't applause, just a quiet murmur, the sound of people finding pieces of themselves again. That was enough. Back at home, the days grew longer. I opened the windows, letting the house breathe again. I baked for the first time in months apple pie, William's favorite, and shared it with the children next door. Their laughter filled the rooms that had once felt haunted. It reminded me that the past doesn't vanish. It transforms. Daniel called often. He started volunteering at a rehabilitation center working with veterans. "It helps," he said once, "doing something that doesn't revolve around money." I smiled. Maybe redemption doesn't come from grand gestures. Maybe it starts with small ones, the kind that plant new seeds. As summer arrived, I began tending the garden again. My hands, though older and stiffer, remembered the rhythm. Plant, water, prune, wait. Life, I realized, follows the same pattern. You plant the truth, you nurture it with courage, and eventually it blooms no matter how long winter lasts. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I brought out William's old chair and sat by the roses. The breeze carried the smell of earth and rain. I took the framed will from the study and placed it on my lap. The handwriting was faded, but the words were still strong. "For my beloved wife, Eleanor, the keeper of my heart and our home." I whispered into the air, "I kept it safe, love, just like you asked." A single petal loosened from the rosebush and drifted down, landing softly on the will. It felt like an answer. In that quiet moment, I realized that victory wasn't the verdict or the headlines or even the law bearing my name. Victory was this peace after chaos, truth after lies, and the soft, enduring love that outlived betrayal. The world had moved on from my story, as it always does. But inside this little house, history had been rewritten the right way. And as the light faded and the crickets began to sing, I understood something final and simple. When you refuse to let injustice define you, you don't just save your name, you save your soul. The roses swayed again in the wind, red as defiance, alive as truth. Autumn came gently that year, as if the world itself wanted to rest after everything it had witnessed. The leaves turned gold. The air smelled of wood smoke and forgiveness, and the house, my house, finally felt alive again. Sunlight spilled through the windows like it used to when William was alive. And sometimes, if I closed my eyes, I could almost hear his laugh drifting from the kitchen, that low, warm sound that always made the walls feel bigger. The world outside had moved on. The headlines faded, the cameras left, and the town went back to its rhythm. But I stayed here where it all began, and let the silence teach me what survival really means. I didn't rebuild my life, I remembered it. I remembered the woman I was before grief, before fear, before betrayal. The teacher who believed that knowledge could set anyone free. The wife who stood beside her husband through every struggle. The mother who once thought love could excuse anything. Now I knew better. Love doesn't mean surrender. It means standing firm when the people you love lose their way and waiting patiently for them to find it again. Daniel visited every Sunday. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. He'd bring groceries, help me fix things around the house, and sometimes just sit quietly while I read in the sunroom. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. One afternoon, he arrived with something in his hand, a small framed photo. It was an old picture of him and William building the front porch, both of them grinning, covered in sawdust. He placed it on the mantel beside my wedding photo. "I found it in the garage," he said softly. "Dad would have wanted it here." I smiled. He would have wanted us both here. He nodded, his eyes wet. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking. I might start over somewhere new, maybe teach shop class at the community college. It feels right to build things again." I reached out, touching his hand. "Build yourself first, son. The rest will follow." When he left that evening, I watched his car disappear down the street and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope pure and unguarded. Maybe he would find his way back to the man William always believed he could be. The garden had grown wild over the summer. The roses were taller, deeper in color, as if they'd inherited my stubbornness. I spent hours pruning them, humming to the rhythm of the wind. Children from the neighborhood sometimes stopped by to help. They called me Miss Eleanor, and I'd teach them how to plant, how to listen to the soil, how to care for something fragile until it's strong enough to survive on its own. One little girl, Emma, looked up at me one day and asked, "Why do you take care of flowers that hurt you when you touch them?" I smiled. "Because, sweetheart, even beautiful things have thorns. It's not the thorns that matter, it's that they still bloom anyway." She thought about that for a long moment before nodding, her small hands covered in dirt. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since William died. I used to think the worst thing in life was losing the people you love. Now I know it's losing yourself while trying to please them. But if you can survive betrayal, if you can look in the mirror and still recognize your own eyes, then you haven't lost everything, you've found your strength. I closed the book and placed it in the drawer beside William's will, the one that had cost me so much to protect. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because it was a reminder truth is fragile only until you hold it. A few months later, I was invited to speak at the high school where I had once taught. They called it Legacy Day, a celebration of former teachers who'd left a mark. I almost declined. I didn't think I had anything left to say. But that morning, as I looked at the roses outside, blooming defiantly against the cold, I realized I did. The auditorium was full of young faces, restless, expectant. When I took the stage, the murmur faded. I looked at them so eager to rush into life, unaware of how hard it can be. I used to believe that wisdom came with age I began. But I've learned that wisdom comes from standing in the fire and realizing it can't burn what's true. A hush fell over the room. I lost my husband, and I almost lost myself. People I loved turned me into a stranger, tried to erase everything I'd built. But here's what I want you to know. You can lose everything. Money, reputation, comfort, and still win if you keep your dignity. Because dignity, I said, touching my heart, is the only thing no one can take unless you hand it over. When I finished, there was no thunderous applause. Just quiet tears and stillness, the kind that means people are listening with their souls. That was enough for me. When I returned home that evening, the sunset painted the house in gold. I brewed tea and sat in the sunroom watching the light fade across the garden. I could feel William everywhere in the creak of the floorboards and the smell of chamomile, in the hush of peace that now lived in every corner of this house. Before bed, I stood by the window and whispered, "You were right, love." The truth always finds its way home. Outside, the wind rose and carried the scent of roses through the open window. It was like the world was answering. I turned off the light and walked to the study. The framed will still hung on the wall beside our wedding photo. I touched the glass lightly, tracing his name. "Thank you," I said softly, "for trusting me to finish what you started." Then I looked at my reflection and smiled. Not the weary, uncertain smile of a woman who survived too much, but the quiet, steady one of someone who has finally come home to herself. I stepped outside for one last look at the garden. The night air was cool and the stars stretched wide above me. I knelt by the rosebush, ran my fingers through the petals and whispered to the earth, "For every woman who's ever been silenced, for every heart that's been broken, may you bloom again." because truth doesn't shout, it endures. And as the wind carried my words away, the roses swayed as if they were listening.